All right.
It's 6:30, so I'll call the meeting to order. The first thing we have is public comments. Not seeing any member of the public, we'll move on to number 3, agenda review. Anything else?
I would like to add transportation to the business.
All right.
Are you gonna make my night, Jess? You might make my night with that.
Wait,
Is that it?
and we read non-public in order.
Hey, okay. Got it. Anybody else all set? Okay, number 4, we have the minutes of the previous meeting from November 4th.
On the agenda, it says the 21st.
Oh, my agenda says.
Mine says November 4th.
Oh, I'm going on line. Oops. Oh, maybe maybe.
Have we,
Hold on, let me go back to that.
we can't. It isn't.
Yeah, we have a meeting on the
We have a meeting on 4th, November 4th.
October.
Oh, I thought,
The draft minutes are the.
I was with you, Ken.
Yeah.
Okay. It's the correct minutes in the folder. So I made a motion to approve.
Oh, second.
Give me 1 second.
Second.
Any discussion on the meeting minutes or correction?
And you give us all.
All those in favor of approving meeting minutes from November 4th, say aye.
I,
Abstentions, nays. All right, moving on to board reports. Do you have any board reports?
I think they could.
You do.
So I met, budget committee had a meeting last Thursday. Pretty much kicking off the regular season. We had the librarian. Also, every time they asked for a school update, I did share, the school care letter about the rates, in the meeting, and, we should, that's about it.
Anything?
No, it was only.
Keep us in charge, so let's just.
Yeah, so we, except for we talked about, school care, talked about how budget's going, give an update on where we were at with the transportation RFP that had gone out. And talked about the importance of if folks were going to make decisions and changes regarding health insurance, that we make sure that we consult with each of the boards, because if somebody chooses a different, company to go with, it may have an adverse effect on all the remaining school districts, because we may have price of making increase due to a pool of employees pulling out of the agreement. Whether or not we decide to stay with the same one or whether we company with that, but the unified, approach to a plan would be beneficial. That's about it.
All right, we will move on to number 6, media business. First, we have letter A, number track.
Good evening. Here to talk about the Pembroke Academy track. It's been on the capital improvement plan for some time now. You've heard me speak about it at the CIP level, at the school board level for many years at this point in time. There's been lots and lots of conversation on that track, and I'm here today to ask for the okay to get that project. So with that, I reached out to more than a handful of companies. I did only receive 2 prices back. One for Maine Tennis and Track for $410,500, and the other from Field Turf for a budgetary range of $475,000 to $500,000. The capital improvement number in the voted on warrant article was for $495,000. So I'm here to recommend that we move on with Maine Tennis and Track. Nothing against the other company, but the price fits our budget that has been voted on and approved. It will also allow us and allow me to ask for a do not exceed number for $495,000, which I would ask for that number to be. Getting into the unknowns, as we know, you just never know what can come up, and you need to have a contingency plan. And on top of that, I also know there will be some finish work with this job to include some grass after the fact. There after the fact, which is not included in this number, which we would look to go through a local company to finish that part off. Main Track and Tennis, they sealed it prior to my time with my predecessor. They painted it during my time. They've got us out of some of the big vines with the cracks and crevices that we talked about out there. And there's no doubt in my mind that they would be a great company to work with. And the other side of it, I guess, is the sooner we sign off and get on their books, the sooner I can book it for a June job to be booked for the summer. These jobs, you can't necessarily call up today and expect them to be here tomorrow. So the way that process would look is I would sign off after your approval. I would send a purchase order over at the beginning of the new year, because the deposit needed for this would be deposited at the end. So a signature on a proposal would get us on the books, and then the purchase order would get us moving along, and it would allow us to get the job.
Any questions?
The remaining 85,000 we buffer for those contingencies. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Motion to approve the request to
Maine Tennis, thank you, to go with Maine Tennis and Track to prepare our track here. And not to exceed an amount of $495,000. I'll second it. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Okay. So they don't have, I mean, I was just looking them up quickly as we went here. They're up north of Portland. It looks like, is that their main, or do they have something local?
No, they're up north.
Yep. They don't have any issues working in this area?
No, not at all. Again,
I know you.
they painted our track before they resurfaced it with my predecessor. Companies like that, they move around New England. You know, it was coming out of Oklahoma in the trucks, and the product was. I would have questions, but they're coming out of Portland. Their trucks and staff is coming out of their home base, and they're using some local companies, not necessarily local to the area for the asphalt.
Okay. Yeah, their reviews look good.
everybody else, no question? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any extensions? Any? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you want to go to state. All right, we're going to stick around a little bit. We're going to do C next, clear though.
So usually, for most of the, spammy emails that I get from a lot of different vendors, and not that they don't offer great services, but I think they do it their day. However, I had came across recently that did catch my interest. And so I asked for basically a sales presentation. I met with one of the consultants I did provide a document in the drive, and if you put on the one called ClearGov, there are some links in there you can actually click on and see what kind of service this company provides. Because they essentially work with your business office to take your budget and break it down into easily digestible graphs, images, things that the public can easily digest and understand. It works with a lot of governmental agencies to make their budget consumable to the local constituents. So just wanted to throw this out here as a potential option. Obviously, it does come with cost. And, you know, anytime you go with a company like this, there's not only the cost for the program, but then the first year, there's always the cost for the implementation of it and to get your district set up in your program. So it's not cheap, but I felt like I needed to bring this forward because we've been talking about ways to help the community better understand what our budget entails and paint a picture of where the tax dollars are going and why. And this program seems to meet a lot of that need. The very top quote that he gave me for the first, I believe it was for 15 months. Forwarded it out. The first quote was $9,600, and that included the program itself, the subscription, and the onboarding fee to get all our data pushed into there and teach us how to use it. And then every year moving forward, if we wanted to keep that, the subscription will be around $6,900 per year for Pembroke. So just looking for your thoughts and feedback, and if this is something you're interested in. If not, fine, tell them that those things like that, that experience, the same kind of needs some of the things that we were talking about.
6,900. So is this something that we would look to make an SAU one to, and so that's 6,900. I'm reading it. As the other board. But it's a good point.
But yes, and. So yes, there are options for both. I mean, obviously, cost more, but it's cheaper for district. I can put on your agenda tomorrow night. I'm not sure where the other funds are at, but I can double check. But there are options to expand and do a more full discount. So I just didn't want us to be held up.
Sure. No, I understand. Is it the case when we're talking about basically an onboard of is this then a platform that we would then basically find stuff?
Right.
So they can maybe offer some tech support on that, but beyond that, they're not.
Right. It will be for the first year and help us out and onboard and all that. But you get it right on the nail. It really is that kind of taking over the software to us or the platform so that us to kind of create our own projection and story to tell. And they do, you can take any of your data that you can do. Yes, you can select specific graphs to share out. You can turn it into like a storyboard to share out a storyboard. So there's different ways that they have direct links. So the site, you essentially create a website, which is what we can access out here, and then it becomes a public link. So anybody can go in there and look real time to see what the data is, and you can manipulate it as the viewer. So as the viewer, if you wanted to isolate 2024-25 data, you can click on that and only look at 24-25 data, or remove 24-25 data, or you can add in 21-22. So you can kind of view what data you want to view when you are the consumer looking. so the graphs are interactable and you can move things around. You can't change the data, but you can look at the layers that are there.
Right, and I guess it's, so, yeah, okay, I'm wondering that, what are we currently there to build up?
So,
What is that? Maybe we'll continue to use that in this interface.
interfaces. Yeah, we would, this would remove our actual budgeting software.
This isn't something we input raw. These has to kind of pull.
And what we would do really is we would download the information from our budgeting system in like Excel format, so it's like raw data, and then upload it into this platform. And then it would aggregate the rest of it, figure it out, and then we would.
Very thoughtful.
Yeah. She thought it was really great the way that it laid things out in pictures. What her favorite part was that it creates the formulas for you. And she doesn't have to manually create hundreds of formulas. Because of the time she creates all her graphs and images that she shows up, is manually creating the formula in Excel to then generate that picture that is shown to the budget.
It is the case, sorry, I want to. Great. It's the case though that when this is, if this is up and running, this, because I thought that this would be a public view. And not just for the purposes of planning and voting, but also for real time data. Am I getting that right? So like this person could log in and say, you know, what's the state of our current budget in the school system? Or does it not update that? Continually, is it sort of live?
I didn't explore that option. I think it will.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's something we need to consider. I think we would have to do that manual download of the data. And so, right, like or even like quarterly, right? Like, I don't know if monthly is like not going to be helpful.
Yeah.
But even, I didn't broach that question, but I believe, I don't see why this program couldn't do something like that, because it's going to tell a story of whatever numbers you're putting in there. So we could do a quarterly expenditure report or something.
Make sure that we're not running over our head.
Where did this come from? In our budget, but I think it's a good discussion to have because trying to break down the data, you know, you guys have talked a lot to try to do the March presentation is an awful lot to grade all those graphs every single year and try to break it down into a way that they didn't understand.
So that's the part I'm not sure about. We're still on this year. We would have to look at lines that maybe we have expended, like if we have some of our staff lines might be under, because we've had some changeover in staff, so some of those might be under, so we might have a little buffer. You know, I think something to consider is also we have that bill from school care, right? So I don't want to push it too much, but I know this kind of fits the goals of where you guys are looking to grow. And so, if we can't do it this year, then, you know, I definitely would support something for next year. And maybe we can kind of live along this year, do the best we can. Not live along, but at the same time, we kind of do it, right? And try to improve it, but it's not as robust as what this system can do. And then we can put it in the budget for next year, and they guarantee that we have a place to versus trying to conceal it this year.
We're talking about like the updating of the budget in, or well, paper budget in so my question is, budget season, will this work for the budget where we're be able to, information be able to be entered into it and then pushed out so people can see it as we go?
Yes.
Okay.
That ultimately was the main reason I did that, was so that we could create the pictorial story of the budget we're dealing with now next year.
Mhm.
So the proposed budget. And then it looks like we can create tabs over on the side, so we might be able to make a whole different tab. Yeah, right? Holy cow. Yeah, there's so many things. And the numbers person means loving. Yeah. I really like encourage you to play with those links that I included in the drive because they're each district, these are real school districts, they're not big. Each one is very different because it was catered to that community's needs. And so each one doesn't have the exact same color data that's in there. So I think you could create another tab that talks about this current school year's budget, and also the projected one for the fall.
It has everything class size for. So instructional framework. I mean, just, there's so much information.
And it's mostly really our website doesn't include a lot of these things, but it's not easily consumable. This puts it in a way that you can just click and you can move things around, you can isolate numbers. It's just easy to read as a user looking at it. You're like, oh yeah, well, now it's that word.
So, yeah, it's not the greatest, but it's good. I just, I was watching it.
Yeah.
And you're going to talk to the other team.
Yeah, I don't know if you tomorrow night. I mean, I guess I'm just looking to see if you guys want to plan for this for the next year, or if you want to pursue this for this year, or what your plan is.
I'm listening to you're always excited as I am about this, I think. I don't want to forget about it either. Well, I think it's just.
You like also all the number kind of budget for some projects. And I see this get regular out there, so we will have pause and yeah, we can do.
We can go and have a conversation about open enrollment with, those people.
All right, you want to bring this big kids table?
I'd be glad to.
I think first question is whether the board wants to seek legal advice in non-public session or speak in. It's a prerogative of the board.
I was thinking it was going to be public, just get over the law, but it's just all general. And it's a good thing to just say it's a good this discussion, so I was saying. Me too.
Yeah.
Well, great.
Start asking questions.
You can ask, let us know.
Yeah, I'm sure you will.
I'll let you know after I answer them. That wasn't a good question. Okay. This is my dessert for the evening.
Yes.
So my name is Dean Eckert. I'm with the firm of Wadley, Starr and Peters in Manchester, New Hampshire. We've had the privilege of providing legal services to the SAU and to the district for a number of years now. As you may have heard some time ago, well, almost a month ago now, the New Hampshire Supreme Court resolved the question as to what was necessary for a district to be obligated under the open enrollment as a potential sending district. Just a little bit of history probably is in order, because when people hear the phrase open enrollment, it really may conjure up any number of meanings to people as they hear that phrase. Originally, the concept of open enrollment was coupled with the charter school statute. And what happened one evening is the legislature decided that no, open enrollment schools really are not charter schools. It's a broader concept. And so they pulled out from the charter school statute portions of the open enrollment pieces in that statute and created a new statute, which we now call RSA 194D, the open enrollment statute. Now, the best proof of that is if you still look at the charter statute, you'll see that it defines the phrase open enrollment within the charter statute, even though it doesn't do anything about it in that statute. And so the issue came to the Supreme Court by way of really Pittsfield, New Hampshire, Pittsfield School District. What they had was a situation where Prospect Mountain had voted through Alton and Barnstead to become an open enrollment jointly managed public high school. You may recall that those two towns, those districts got together and created Prospect Mountain under a joint maintenance agreement. And then a family from Pittsfield applied to, and their child was accepted to Prospect Mountain. Pittsfield responded by saying, but we have not adopted the open enrollment statute. And that is the position that every other district in the state has been in and was in at the time of the Pittsfield case, and even to this day. The only district or high school or school that has actually declared open enrollment, with the exception of perhaps Franklin, would be Prospect Mountain. And so fast forward, it went through the state board appeal process because Pittsfield denied the request made by Prospect that it pay the open enrollment tuition rate, which is 80% of your average per pupil cost. And at the time the request was made, it was unclear 80% of whose cost. Now, since then, the legislature has clarified to say that it would be 80% of the average per pupil cost of the resident district if you go to an open enrollment school. Now, unfortunately, the legislature has not further clarified and answered the question, if your child goes to an open enrollment high school, is it 80% of your average per pupil high school cost, or is it your overall average per pupil cost? That's not clarified in the statute. More to come, perhaps, from the legislature. So Pittsfield opposed throughout the state board process, through the state board appeal process, this idea that they would be obligated because they had never adopted an open enrollment program for their district. And the Supreme Court heard the appeal, which had been adverse to Pittsfield, affirmed the decision of the State Board of Education that it does not take two to tango, that any single district can declare an open enrollment school or program or district, and the end result is that it would then obligate the residents of surrounding districts, or really the districts, if their residents apply to and are accepted in an open enrollment school or program, to pay that 80% of their average per pupil cost to the recipient or receiving open enrollment program or district. So with that decision, which caused a fair amount of, I would say, confusion and then questioning, we really see emerging throughout the entire state this discussion of what should districts do in response to the Supreme Court decision that essentially interpreted a statute as effectuating unilaterally the ability to create open enrollment. The other thing that comes with that is this really interesting situation where there is no provision in the statute for a district to just declare limitations. In other words, if you read the statute, it allows you to declare limitations coming in and going out if you are an open enrollment school district. But there's no authorizing statute that would allow you to simply declare limits. Say, we're not an open enrollment school district, but we'd like to declare a limit with regard to how many students may progress out of our district. It seems to attach it with adopting an open enrollment program or an open enrollment school or an open enrollment grade, and I'll get into that in a moment. Then you can adopt limitations between 0% and 100%. For those of you who are into numbers, it's an interesting question. What does that mean? If I say between 0 and 100%, does that mean it's got to be 0.00001 and then 99.99, or can I use 0? Can I use 100%? But that's a mathematical debate for another day. So moving right along, let's start with the side of the equation where a school district was contemplating creating some type of open enrollment program or district. First, it's not something that a school board can do. It requires a vote of the citizens ultimately to adopt an open enrollment school program. The board can propose it, the board can put it on its warrant, and with that, the board can also propose limitations coming in and going out. Now, the other nuance I think that I need to emphasize is that this is not an all or nothing proposition. I know that a lot of people have just been talking about, oh, you're either open enrollment or you're not. There's really a more nuanced approach, which you'll find in RSA 194D4, which starts with this idea that there's a pupil selection and enrollment process if you're on the side of deciding that you'd like to do either an open enrollment program or school. And the first point in that statute, 194D4, is that open enrollment schools may set maximum enrollment as they deem appropriate. That's really important because think about this. If you declared that you're open enrollment, let's say you've got the hottest school in the state, hottest program in the state, how would you ever begin to even declare the limitations? Because your first priority under the statute would always be your resident students. They definitely get priority. So this would always be your resident students. And then the question is, what is our capacity for maximum enrollment? Now, in my opinion, there's no definition as to how you would declare that. And so you might define it by, this is the level of staffing we have. This is the level of physical space we have. There's really no further definition as to how you would set that. But let's assume you set a maximum enrollment number. Then the statute goes on to say that open enrollment schools, which would be part of a district, and that immediately is a tell. You don't necessarily say, okay, our entire school district is now an open enrollment district. You would designate potentially a school, or as we find later in the statute here, that you may even as an open enrollment school, if you adopt your policy, if you adopt a program, may limit enrollment to specific grade or age levels. Now I'll stop right there. I'm not sure how that works because let's say you say, we're open enrollment for the 6th grade only. Well, they continue to stay in your program. There's really no clear way in the statute where you're open enrollment for 6th grade only and then you say, oh, so sad, too bad. You don't do 7th, you don't do 8th. We specialize in 6th grade only. So I'm not quite sure exactly what that means, but it does give you that latitude. Now, age level would be almost irrelevant until you were moving into, say, let's say you had a really interesting, innovative preschool or kindergarten program, and you wanted to make that open enrollment. You might have some age criterion there. But then it goes on to say you could limit enrollment to particular specific pupil needs or areas of academic focus. And then it gives examples. And what's really important is this phrase, including but not limited to. Whenever you hear that, that's both a lawyer's delight and a lawyer's nightmare. If it's prohibitive, saying you shouldn't do this, including but not limited to the following, then you have to worry about what are all the other things I shouldn't do that are like that. Here, it's broader, saying you can have these criteria for your open enrollment program, which could include but are not limited to, and then it lists examples. At-risk pupils, vocational education pupils, mathematics, science, the arts, history, or languages. And so you certainly would have the latitude as a district, if you wanted to create some form of open enrollment school or program, to design and create a target. The other thing that's very interesting about the statute that came out of, really, I think that charter school pedigree, is language that I don't think had you crafted as a legislator an open enrollment program from day one with the idea that public schools should be equitable and open to all, that you probably wouldn't have a sentence that then says, open enrollment schools may select pupils on the basis of aptitude, academic achievement, or need, provided that such selection is directly related to the academic goals of the school. So that's very interesting because it leaves open a really fascinating philosophical debate. Are we really going to then, if we do this, adopt a program that says, okay, if you have a certain level of aptitude, you come to an open enrollment program. If you have a certain level of academic achievement, maybe you do the, sort of 4.0 open enrollment program. If you hold a 4.0 in your other district, you're welcome here kind of program, which sounds a little odd to me, a little bit counterintuitive. And then obviously it has to correlate to your academic goals, which is a pretty broad statement because every school district has broad academic goals. And so most of the time, whatever you did would correlate with those goals. Now, interestingly enough, it goes on to talk about the idea that if you exceed your maximum, then you use a lottery. Now, that's challenging because if you're using a lottery, that means that somehow you're going to have to set cutoff dates, right? We've all had that experience or heard of neighboring districts that have struggled with how would they manage a lottery when there's limited selection. Hypothetically, let's say you had 2 different schools in your district students could go to, and you allowed only a certain amount to flow out to another school, then you might have a lottery going out. Here, it's a lottery coming in. So that makes it a little bit challenging. The one thing, though, that I want to emphasize is that your students will always have the first priority in any program. Now, I want to get to the other side, which is, so now you've adopted an incoming program, and maybe you've determined that right now your program is running at 1/3 of its total capacity, whatever it is. You would then set your percentage, limiting what could flow in from outside of your district to reflect capping probably at or near whatever you set as that maximum capacity, right? Now there's the question of flowing out. Now the only example we have of flowing out limitations right now would be Prospect Mountain and probably Franklin, right? And in Prospect Mountain, we know that they said we'll take up to 100% of our capacity because of the open capacity they had. But when it comes to flowing out, 0% flowing out. So a little bit of a Hotel California. If you live in our district, you can't go. But if you are from out, you're welcome, right? And so there's a little bit of a one-sided equation there. And so that's the only example that exists right now in terms of setting those limits. Now, I think a district can be much more creative than that if it has narrowed the scope of its open enrollment program to something that is A, very attractive, and B, something that you can manage. Then I think you very clearly can set inflows. And then the question becomes, what would you set for an outflow? Now, at first blush to the taxpayer, it sounds somewhat attractive because the statute suggests that you'll pay to that new district. If you, let's say you said, you know what, we have no limitation on who could leave the Pembroke School District to attend an open enrollment school. No limit, because we'll always only pay 80% of our average per pupil cost. Well, what would happen? Let's just talk hypotheticals. If the first year, 50% of your students went somewhere else, what do you think it would do to your average per pupil cost for those students who are your students? It would immediately escalate your exposure. And there are actually districts who are already on the cusp of experiencing that very impact. In other words, what they currently pay you under the AREA is one number, their average per pupil cost is another, and unfortunately 80% of that other number is more than what they pay under the AREA. And so I think taxpayers need to be really careful and well advised before they say, oh, I can't wait to save 20%. Because the question is, it's of what numerator, what denominator are we talking about here? And so it's a little bit more of a sophisticated analysis. I would say generally, without getting into district-specific legal advice, I would say that any district that is considering open enrollment needs to ask the question, what is the exposure around my district, right? And then if you're part of an AREA, you need to ask yourself, well, would this be a self-inflicted injury on the other AREA members? Would it be detrimental to my district? And it's interesting because those districts closer to the one open enrollment school that exists are dealing with this in real time. Other districts in areas where there are no geographically proximate open enrollment schools are very much taking more of a wait and see approach because no one has proposed to do open enrollment in their area. Now, all of this could become moot. The legislature is considering, it has bills that were retained in committee, some of which set up a new approach to open enrollment and include global open enrollment in New Hampshire. Now, that's not a strange phenomenon. It occurs in other states, or open enrollment states. The one thing that I don't think has been studied is the impact that would have on the way we fund education. Because if we create essentially a broad state flow from district to district, and yet we're funding locally, it creates a really interesting disparate equation where the one thing that fascinates me is, have those individuals who have studied open enrollment, have they considered the impact it may have on the way we fund education in New Hampshire? Because if it's no longer tied to residency, then why is funding tied to residency? Is the fundamental question that I'll leave to the legislators to decide, because it's not the province of the lawyer.
Ken said they're doing a great job already.
I think the challenge will be this: when you look at those bills, there may very well be that classic note that we often see, which is neither the DRA nor the DOE are able to determine the fiscal impact of the bill, right? And so that is challenging. It'd be nice if we could determine that impact before someone was to opt in, opt out to it. So those are that's the broad flyover. And of course, we could have a situation where you could roll out a proposal only to find it mooted out or superseded by legislation by the time people are looking at this issue in March, potentially to vote at your annual meeting, for example, on a proposal. You may find that the legislature has spoken on the issue. Depending on how they speak, there's an open question of whether or not it will comply with the prohibition in our Constitution against unfunded mandates or not. We just don't know until we read a bill like that as to whether or not it would. So I think at this juncture, that's probably what I wanted to share with you this evening. If it is something that you want to, as you think about it as a board, if you want to do something in that category, we can work with you on the format of a warrant article. Those districts within your SAU that are experiencing outflow probably will feel that they need to do something, because it does, at some level, for all members of the AREA, jeopardize the viability of an AREA agreement, right? Because if you think about it, it's a situation where it's a gunny sack situation, right? Any poke on one side is getting absorbed by the rest of the gunny sack. And so, for example, the reality is, we looking at about 11 students who have left the whole AREA catchment area, right? So if you're looking at that, that adds up to some significant dollars. And under your AREA agreement, it's absorbed by everybody else. The formula is pretty clear. There's no action that anybody needs to take. It just moves you closer to a situation where the economic advantages created by your AREA are eroded. They're degraded. And right now, your AREA average per pupil cost, honestly, is highly competitive. It's a great number. You start pulling out students. Now we had the benefit under the AREA of combating the demographic issue, the count issue, right? Because we could aggregate students. But if that gets pulled away and frayed on the edges, then obviously that's absorbed by the rest of the members. The other thing I think that you need to do as a board is talk with your brother and sister boards around your geographic area and ask them, what do you plan to do? So for example, there are any number of districts around you that you don't typically engage with that may declare open enrollment programs. You know, if you think about it geographically right now, Prospect Mountain is not geographically a great draw for, let's say, Allenstown. It's a bit of a road trip, right? You can do it, but it's a road trip. And for the rest of your districts, it's a bit of a road trip. Epsom seems to be taking the largest hit right now in terms of being attractive to them. And so, but you can think of neighbors that if they declare open enrollment, it will also pull in other geographic directions, right? So, and we also have to think about not just the Pembroke School District, but you have other member districts in the SAU and AREA if they're geographically proximate to a school that declares that, right? So those are the big challenges. I can tell you in real time that as I try to negotiate tuition agreements for districts throughout the state, it's having a real chilling effect on the ability of the districts to come together, because the sending districts are all in the back of their mind thinking, well, why would I enter into an agreement to pay 100% of their tuition when the legislature might give me a 20% discount, right? And so that's out there. And then similarly, other districts that would be receiving districts are saying, well, I'm not sure who I want to be in an agreement with, right? I need to look at what their average per pupil cost is, if that's going to ultimately define it. So very interesting times of transition and fascinating for a lawyer, never boring, but it's very real for school boards. It's not just fascinating, it's very real. So any questions that I could try to answer for you, and I can promise you I don't have all the answers on this one.
I have a quick one. Do we know yet, or is it for legislation? So if we were open enrollment and a Concord student came here with an IEP, is Concord still going to be responsible for the special education services like when we go to a charter school? Is the sending district still going to pay those expenses?
Right now, that's the law. So under the current open enrollment statute, if a student came to you from Concord, or if you sent a student out, or you don't really send, the parent elects to go out, right? You will be responsible as the resident district for special education, much like the charter school statute. The charter school statute, I don't mean to digress too much, but it's an anomaly. Most states actually provide the federal funding for special education, fund the charter schools sufficiently so that they can address the needs, the special education needs of their students. This is a less efficient model. The idea was that it would somehow save funds, potentially, I suppose, for charter schools. The other anomaly is that currently charter schools are funded slightly more than we are when it comes to adequacy. I assume the rationale being that they can't tax. But your question right now, the answer is pretty clear in the statute that if we have a student who departs by parent choice to an open enrollment school, we are responsible for their special education services. And vice versa.
My only other question too is if we were open enrollment, how many are talking about we accept 120, let's just say, with 0% point count. Is that just the open enrollment component, or like the kids of Pembroke would not be allowed to go to a charter?
It has really no impact on EFAs or charter schools, or for example, manifest educational hardship. Those all still exist. I think you will find that the need for best interest reassignments or manifest educational hardship assignments will obviously go away if we're broadly open enrollment, because then it's just a matter of a parental choice, right? The parent will choose to enroll their child in a school that they feel would mitigate any manifest educational hardship.
So if we were to choose to put a warrant for that,
Mhm.
Do we have time for March to get this in some sort of, I guess, would we be able to cover all of our bases that we need to before March to get a together? That's what we do.
That's a great question, probably best answered by your superintendent, because a lot of it will depend on what the desire of the board is. So if, for example, you are contemplating that you want to designate something in particular as an open enrollment program, then there would be a little bit of legwork. What's our capacity? How many students can we then absorb in that program? What and how will we set the criteria for entry into that program? I don't know that that's a heavy lift. I think the other part would be, what would be our percentage of outflow, if any? Would we allow 5 students to go out of our district in open enrollment? And bear in mind that when we talk about open enrollment, going out is always defined by the opportunities around you, right? So right now, there are no open enrollment opportunities in the southwestern part of the state. So it becomes highly academic. And I still don't know whether it's going to be a rush for the door for everyone to do this, or people are going to say, well, with the legislature essentially going to act on something, should we wait? And so I think you want to adopt, because you have to adopt some form of an open enrollment program, you want to do that in good faith, with good pedagogical reasons, with some thought process behind it. Ask the question, okay, what would be beneficial in this area? What would be beneficial to the Pembroke School District? Maybe there's a program where we just couldn't quite do volume. I'll give you sort of a textbook example. Let's say there's modest interest in Mandarin. Nobody's doing Mandarin, and yet you have an interest that's sparked in Pembroke, and you know that around you there are enough families with interest. That would be an illustration of a very strategic, surgical, open enrollment program where you might say, for example, our middle school is open for up to 20 students who want to be in an early introduction Mandarin framework as well as middle school. Great illustration of how you might meet a otherwise unmet need in an area. Don't know if it's true or false, but just an illustration.
I feel like Jess has already kind of started that process of what our capacity will be, and we've all started to kind of mull over what we think output would be. What we're really taking, but I think we're pretty solid on what we wanted to give them.
I think the tough part is that there's some circularity to it. And one of the bills, there are a couple bills that were retained in committee, and it might be useful for me to tell you a little bit about those bills. There was House Bill 741 that actually passed the House. It was retained in committee from last session, and it made every public school open enrollment, but still allowed districts to set their maximum capacities, right? The interesting part is there's no provision for setting your minimum, you know. And then there was a competing Senate Bill 101, that also made every public school open enrollment. That one had one feature that's made some sense, which was it exempted military dependent children from capacity limits. You could see the rationale behind that. And then interestingly enough, the Senate bill, and I'm going to read this because this is something that was actually contemplated. It says, has this phrase, provided that if the receiving district's average cost per pupil, now it's talking about the formula for how you're going to calculate tuition that would flow out of, let's say, Pembroke. Provided that if the receiving district's average cost per pupil is lower than the student's resident district average cost per pupil, then the resident district shall retain such difference. So that's scenario number one. Let's say there is a receiving district out there that gets the job done for less than we do. Under that scenario, we'd retain the delta. Then it goes on to say, if the transferring student's resident district average cost per pupil is less than the receiving district's average cost per pupil, such difference shall be charged as tuition and paid by the pupil's parents or guardians to the receiving district prior to the start of each semester. Now that would take, I believe the idea was it would at least take the top off of the risk that through open enrollment there would be this unfunded mandate where all of a sudden we're paying something we couldn't fund locally. Now, it doesn't address in that context, and I'd have to look at the draft bill. This, of course, could be somewhat moot if you're looking at a special education cost that goes with that child somewhere. Currently, under the AREA, it's all absorbed in one number, which makes your AREA very attractive because you're not assessing a unique number to a district that has a population of children with special needs. It's borne by everyone as a risk, much like a risk pool, right? And so that's a really attractive piece of your AREA. One disadvantage of open enrollment is that it then exposes each resident district to a cost they've never had to really bear before. It was always shared. Now it gets very, very personal to that district. And so that is one built-in current disadvantage with the current statute.
I do reference now two things. One is the mandate. The other is what I take to be the fiduciary responsibility of fathers who are sworn to disperse the town's tax funds as we've outlined in a budget within the district. In other words, we could not tonight vote a new roof on Concord High School. We could not vote for a new teacher in Allenstown. We don't have the authority to spend the tax dollars of this town anywhere other than here. And even more to the point, we also don't, in my understanding, have the authority, which is what this mandate would do, to spend the tax dollars of our area somewhere else, because that's even further out of our scope to do. So I'm wondering how we even have the legal authority to take Pembroke tax dollars anywhere other than here.
So that's a great question, and I'm going to try to deal with it because I think what you've begun to do is actually lay out the framework for what ultimately may be something that has to be resolved by a court someday, which is whether or not this is a funded or unfunded mandate. But I do need to let you know that I'm sure both Allenstown and Concord, if you did vote to do that, would send you a thank you note. I'm quite sure they would. I'm not sure your taxpayers would send you a thank you note. Yeah, they would. But on a more serious note, you really have laid out the sort of the foundation of a legal question as to whether or not it is or is not an unfunded mandate. Now, for some time, you've had to carry, and it's probably in the standard DRA budget that you have, there is a line item for outflow tuition and inflow tuition. And that's a line item in your budget. I don't recall the number. It would take a business person, BA, to give me that number. But it has existed for a long time in your budget. And the law is pretty clear that there are circumstances where we can pay tuition incurred by one of our residents, right? And over the years, that whole concept has broadened and broadened and broadened. I could give you a few illustrations. Obviously, it broadened when the manifest hardship statute was first created, but then they amended the manifest hardship statute to say, and go even so broadly as to say that you could pay tuition to a private school if you so elected to. So over the years, there's been an increasing legislative grant or imprimatur or authority to do things that you and I intuitively would say, that doesn't seem like a typical use of a taxpayer dollar. So here's another illustration. Up in the North Country in Monroe, they don't have a high school. And so they have an unconventional situation where students can go to St. Johnsbury Academy, which is a quasi-public, private institution. Those taxpayer dollars are getting sent to that institution. There's a statute that actually allows that to occur. So it's very much case by case. Your question is at the very core of whether or not this is or is not a funded mandate.
How do you know it's not as strong as it?
I'm pretty much done with that question.
I take all of that. My understanding of that line is like it's more creative. It is reserved for, as you say, specific circumstances in instances where we have do not or cannot provide a certain and that request should be reviewed by either the board or the supervisor. So in other words, it's not the case that a family would simply be their own judge and jury of their own need, whether or not the school provides it, and simply decide unto themselves to take benefit. Because now what the mandate is effectively saying, am I getting that right?
Yes, I mean, that's really what this statute says, is that under open enrollment, if a parent chooses to send their child somewhere other than in your district, and this is unique, it is absolutely unique. I believe it's the only circumstance where a parent, although, for example, in the AREA, all children have been assigned under the AREA, and particularly, let's choose Pembroke. Under Pembroke, every child is assigned to attend Pembroke Academy. Now, under this decision, if a family chooses to send their child to Prospect Mountain High School, this decision does compel us to send those taxpayer dollars at that 80% level to Prospect Mountain High School. There is really an expansion then in this statute of the historic use of that budgetary line item. And I can assure you that this is the only situation that I'm aware of where there's an actual mandate to divert dollars to other districts in this fashion. I guess the other closest one would be sometimes we have sending and receiving district liability when a child who resides in our district is placed in a foster home in another district and there's a loss of custody or a shift in custody. Then if that child has special needs, we may be responsible as the quote sending district versus the receiving district. The idea behind that was to reduce the impact of group homes being in school districts and the local district, for example, being responsible for every child who was placed by the state or the court in that group home. So that's some of the rationale behind the shift.
I'm saying you're wondering to the 11 right now. I mean, I think the question of the warrant article, I think it's almost, I think there's in order to address this question, right, I think thinking about the 11 that are out right now, and honestly don't know how, if we don't have an answer on the unfunded mandate question, I don't know how we offer.
Well, that's a great question.
As stewards of the town's resources, we are. I don't know how we offer.
That's probably the round 2 litigated question. I think the good news for you and the bad news for Pittsfield is they're probably ahead of that issue dealing with that question right now. You're right behind them. With regard to your 11, the other thing that I want to make clear is that if someone's chosen open enrollment for high school, even if we had been open enrollment ourselves and then voted to rescind our open enrollment program, they would not come back under the statute. Once they're out, they get to stay till the terminal grade in that level. Now, it's a little strange because you hear echoes of the charter school statute, even in this open enrollment statute. This is the bizarre part of the statute. It says that if you declare a school to be an open enrollment school, and then you rescind that open enrollment status, another school district can come in and operate your school for you. And so that gives you an idea of the weakness of pulling that out of the charter school statute. Look at 194D. I mean, that is a bizarre outcome, right? Of course, you'd have to be a glutton for punishment to want to come in and run someone else's school as another district. But that's an illustration just of some weakness in the wording of 194D.
Kind of piggyback it pretty much went down everything I had. Concern as steward of the town resource. When the residents come in March to vote on the budget, they are anticipating that their tax dollars are staying. So again, how do we rectify? Explain it. Way. I mean, I really don't understand how we can say, okay, here's our $35 million budget.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody says, well, how many students are going to open enrollment? Oh, at this point we have 5. And then as the year goes around, there's 20. Mm-hmm. And now we've got more than what they were aware of. So they've been ill-informed ultimately. So we've kind of got to, I think when we plan to kind of keep it open. Yeah, it could be 5, 20, or 25 that leave and go somewhere else. That your tax dollars are going to follow to Prospect Mountain or whatever that might be. So, I mean, just not a lawyer, but
Thank goodness.
but seems to me logically that when I pay my tax bill, that my money goes to support the town and the town and the schools, not anywhere else. So this is taken by that local control. I'm not a lawyer because I'm seeing things like litigation, lawsuits, because individuals can start filing lawsuits against the state if they so choose, because their tax dollars did not go to the purpose they were intended to. They can sue us. Oh, they can sue us. Yeah, I've already done that. I've done it. I don't need it again.
So I think your comments really go directly to what we talked about earlier, that there's a clear and stark tension between the way we fund education and this model. And so the question becomes, how could you maintain an open enrollment model that creates equitable opportunities throughout the state, right? Which is a challenge, and still have local funding. We all sort of know who the magnet districts will be if there's open enrollment, right? They're the usual suspects, right? And so then you think about, okay, I'm locally funding. That is going to put tremendous pressure on the legislature to explain why particular districts are now underwriting the cost to educate their child in another district at the expense, in some cases, of their ability to maintain their own schools, right? Mm-hmm. And I can only speculate that, for example, Pittsfield must be under a tremendous amount of pressure, right? Because they're physically, geographically proximate to Prospect Mountain. And I would assume that they're the canary in the coal mine when it comes to this issue, right? Which is difficult. So I would suspect that The answers haven't all surfaced yet. I think the legislature has to grapple with some of these issues. And I think you've articulated well the fundamental inconsistency between this idea of asking taxpayers to fund a local education and then exporting their dollars to another district. That's essentially the concept and the inconsistency between locally funded education, which is the predominant source, and this concept of open enrollment. Now, in those states that have broader open enrollment, you're going to find the states have shifted so that it's more typically more state-driven funding. And then people say, well, okay, if the state is paying for this thing, then it's hard for us to complain. You're not asking us in the same way to fund it locally. That's another possibility, right? And so for now, we look at these odd anomalies where if you're in Carroll, your per pupil cost is in the $50,000 range because you're real estate rich, you've got some good real estate, you've got a few children, and the other people in your cooperative district may be paying fractionally far less per pupil. Not maybe the net number, but per pupil.
I have a question about the warrant. If one of those that goes forward is universal open enrollment for everybody in the state, does that mean you're going to get rid of it and it's not a public business for residents to get a choice and you don't want to have a warrant article? And it's just a free for all because they just pass universal open enrollment?
Well, I believe the State Board of Education has pretty clearly endorsed open enrollment. So it is a possibility that will happen. So directly answering your question, if there's a statute passed that dictates open enrollment as to how it will function, then depending on what the statute says, any local warrant could become entirely moot, right? It could become a useless exercise. You could be attempting to set local limits when that authority has been divested through the statute.
So then what happens to district meeting day that is now still like old fashioned like that person be pointers? It could eventually become a key point, like you're there on a Saturday, do you know what I'm saying? And it takes away the whole.
In some towns, which may find themselves, for example, if you're a town that has no program, maybe you've got, let's say you've got a small elementary, K through 4, right? The majority of your budget will just then be an open enrollment budget. It'll just be, where did they go? And in some ways that exists by virtue of tuition agreements, but it becomes a little bit more predictable. Now, in theory, over time, that exposure would become financially predictable as well. The one other piece of advice I'd be giving to Pembroke is that, and we ran into these challenges in the past with the AREA, just surveying and getting the right entry numbers can be a challenge, right? Because you need good data from your middle school. And so now you need to add to the question very clearly, where are you going to go? And in Pembroke, the other thing that's interesting is that you might have students who were never in your school to start with, who then sign up for open enrollment, right? And now just are a new cost component on your budget, right? Because think about it, there may be families right now that are already paying tuition somewhere else, sending their child to a private school somewhere, who may not even be students at Pembroke Academy, but they're residents of the district, and they could elect just to, depending on the legislation, say, okay, yeah, I'll do open enrollment.
Right.
So that's an unknown number as well, that you might want to get your finger on that number if possible. But it's a hard number to estimate, but even if it's 3 or 4 students, it's a number.
Ultimately, again, going back and he had said, okay, we're going to put a roof on Concord High. ultimately, though, that's what we're doing by paying the mission. And the students there, is that pretty much it's the cost of operation divided out by the number of students in the school. So, you know, again, we're providing tax relief to their residents. We are improving their infrastructure. And there's nothing that the voters here voted to do. And
Well, then I don't want to make it even more challenging, but I know you as a board, as you talk about it further, you'll then get into the question, if that started to happen, how quickly can we respond to it? Because you cannot turn it on a dime. And then the question becomes, can't really shrink a building. Building comes with capital and maintenance costs. And so now you could find yourself doing your own roof and doing someone else's roof potentially as well. So that's, I think, the challenge that, for example, if you're Pittsfield and you see a healthy migration out of your high school and you always were on the bubble, and we understand that educating students is a volume component. There's a volume component to it. The minute you drop in that volume, unless you're like a ninja and can somehow immediately downsize, which is not really feasible, nor necessarily advisable, there will always be this lag problem that will compound your costs potentially. And those are some of the challenges I think that it will be very interesting to see. And as the board talks about this, that's another reason that may leave you compelled to do something with regard to limitations on an outflow from your district.
a couple hundred years ago.
I heard they have no contemporaneous photos.
No, this is true. I listened to the same one. It just strikes me that we're being required to do something that we're not authorized to do. That's kind of where I'm sitting. And yeah, that's where I'm at.
It's a very, very difficult and arcane legal question, and I'm not sure I would feel comfortable opining which way that would go. I will tell you that the whole argument against unfunded mandates over the years has become weaker and weaker and weaker. It seems that if the camel gets their nose under the tent, you're going to pay for the camel. That seems to be the fundamental challenge with unfunded mandates now, that there's almost this, I'll just put it as a layperson, if you had to fund part of it in the past, it's okay that now you have to fund more. Seems to be a refrain when it comes to unfunded mandates, that it's not really a tool to reduce tax exposure as effectively as it historically might have been. There have been only a handful of successful unfunded mandate challenges.
I think mostly because most of us, towns, school districts, whatever, have been browbeaten into submission. I get that. I understand that.
Well, we're glad to work with you over the next couple months as you talk about on a broader policy level, both what might you be doing in terms of inflow, what are the components that'll meet maybe a regional or area need, and then what limitations would you need to put on any outflow as well. Somewhere, as we began, for our numbers person, between 0 and 100%. So.
Another quick question about the warrant article, and this might be something for Doug, is if we were to vote to be a student school, come out and then put it on outgoing students, is that the limit being voted? If we were to be choosing, would the limit have to be voted on, or would the limit a decision? So we're open enrollment, yes, no, or is it Yeah, open enrollment, but these, they put it, we have to do those. For different limits.
It's a both and. In other words, your article would declare your program or your school, probably allude to the criteria, and then also set the limitations. I don't think I'm giving away any trade secret to explain that as a board, you'd need to explain to the citizens how you reached those percentages and the rationale behind it. Because otherwise, you might find someone in the audience who had a different percentage in mind, right? And so that's just part of a board's job to convey to the citizens the rationale, the reasoning behind setting a particular limitation.
So my question is, do we need a new warrant article? If we create this policy, if we were to, we need a new warrant article if we ever need to make changes to the limitation. If we adjusted them, if we wanted to adjust them.
That's a different question.
So the statute actually answers that question. It says for all limitation questions, the school board shall propose a percentage limitation number. So that's proposed in the limitation question. And then it says the number may also be proposed by petition. Then it goes on to say, to change limitation percentages, a district need only act upon the relevant limitation question. So it clearly would be another vote by the district to change a limitation question. It says where no limitations are to be changed, no limitation questions shall be presented to the voters. And it says adoption and limitation actions. So adoption of open enrollment and limitation action shall become effective July 1, immediately following the action to adopt or limit. Now it looked like in that part of the statute that you could have just said, we're not doing open enrollment, we just want to do a limitation. But then unfortunately it says in an earlier part of the statute, in adopting the provisions of RSA 194D, a school district shall impose limitations. And so that's the challenge, is it seems to link the limitation with the program adoption. Doesn't allow you to just say, shall the district impose a limitation on students departing for open enrollment districts of X or Y, which suggests to me the potential for disagreement over whether or not the decision issued by the Supreme Court, that was the debate before the Supreme Court, fundamentally was, did it take two districts to make this happen? And the Supreme Court determined that it only took one to declare the open enrollment. So.
Is there published arbitration ruling against Epsom? Government arbitration, that was.
So there is a process whereby the State Department of Education eventually releases redacted copies of relevant decisions. I don't know that that one has been released. I do know that Pittsfield argued a motion to reconsider before the State Board of Education last Thursday. That's a matter of public record. That was an open hearing. You probably even can upload or download that argument. And I think Epsom also had a public hearing. So that is public as well. Last Thursday. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, moving on to letter D.
It's really quick. So Pembroke has provided several updates. So you have, again, the budget summary changes. She updated that little pamphlet for you guys, so you can see the snippets. In the updates, includes a few different things. You will notice that just in that box on the front of the page, you will see that the proposed budget has increased a little bit, and that is due to the health insurance rates that we received recently. So we included in the drive a copy of the proposed rates from school care, and that's presuming that we stay with school care, that's what was added in there. We are still currently out to bid.
Yeah, the internet.
No, I was passing out food baskets. What? Yeah. It's ma'am.
So,
I didn't say anything because I wasn't sure I was reading it correctly.
you are.
Yeah.
No, you're reading correctly. So, school care came, out with their proposed numbers recently. Pembroke is looking at a 30.3% increase in our rates for next school year. We have until February 1st, I believe it is, to, sign those rates and lock that in. However, we are still to bid. I think February 1st. Yeah. So we are still up to bid. We have several other companies that we're still waiting to hear from. We anticipate having those in the next 23 weeks. So there's still time for us to update numbers if we choose to go with a different vendor. But again, I will caution us being the sole lever of the plan without consulting with all the other districts. Because it depends on who's the largest employer in SAU leads, that may very well catastrophic on all the other districts. In their.
These are new districts that are still in school very well.
Correct.
And what they're
No, it's not gonna be.
doing. I understand that.
They're less than.
Uh,
So a couple of things, it is based on the increase in anticipated healthcare costs overall, period. It also is based on utilization, so the cost of our claims over the last year. And it is what they anticipate our people claiming for next year.
That's based on.
Correct.
So basically, they're making up for their errors.
No, this is solely independent.
Yeah.
We did ask that question and ask them to provide us the data that shows that. And they have said that, you know, this is completely solo from the assessment that was done. This is purely based on their anticipated cost of increase in healthcare that we're all going to experience and our utilization rate. That's why it really is independent because, you know, one, we had a town that received only 7%, one received 9, 11, 14. So they're really, I think we would have seen that all over in reason to pick that up.
I'm a little confused. Okay, so
Last year was what, 11 point something, 11%, correct?
for health insurance, they gave us a special assessment of almost $700,000. And then we estimated high at 15% in our budget, and they came in at 30.3%.
The original estimates were based off of early, yeah.
But still,
Yeah. So they are
more than 12 after 670 something.
yes, because it's unrelated to the assessment.
I get that, I understand that,
Absolutely.
but I don't. The only way that I can reconcile that in my head is that they were banking on, the ACA. I mean, that's what the ACA stuff did, you know, and went up that more than, you know.
Yeah.
3 times, it's almost, you know.
We did go out to bid, I think, last year, a couple years ago, and if you remember, Health Trust, which is one of the biggest bidders, was doing 20 to 30% increases on a regular basis for a couple of years. And we were sheltered from that. And I think maybe it's just one term, but their trust had been experiencing those double-digit increases for quite some time, and we had.
Last year, the state went after us, we got to be underfunded.
So I will say there's also legislation coming out, that will hopefully help address some of the root cause issue of the, bullying. That was the issue, because the reason why they couldn't set aside more funds and had to give more and more back to districts of those holiday benefits, was because of the state law that was in place, so they could not retain because they were nonprofit. And so there is legislation happening, we proposed that would help mitigate some of that and allow them to retain up to a certain percentage, even though they're nonprofit. Because that was cool. You may have already said this, Jess, but I think I was in the super.
So when are we supposed to be receiving these new bids for other health insurance?
It's looking like in the next 2 to 3 weeks, and we had a couple that just communicated with us recently that we should have those numbers very soon. I didn't think I'd have them in time for tonight, so I'm not surprised. But those should be coming in the next couple of weeks.
Okay. And follow-up question to that, yellow land.
So that's another reason.
Right? Yep,
So the other districts don't have a yellow plan, they have red and green. We're the only ones that have the yellow 2.0 choice. So that is another factor as to why ours are increasing larger than this. But this was, what was within the CBA.
We're all waiting to provide you.
No chance for an MOU.
That's up for discussion, we can talk about that. It would have to be something, CBA said that it would have to be something, offer similar to that. So, which is what allows us to kind of look at other companies as well, as long as they offer similar benefits as to what was being currently, or what was currently agreed to.
Does it specify if we all?
And the reason I have to go back and look for sure at the wording.
And the reality too here.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, it's not just, you know, right.
Oh, the other question you're talking about, the school, never going alone. I think maybe rates going up higher because of that. But let's say Townsend had 7%. They're gonna hold on to that for dear life.
Correct.
So, and if there's another district out there, then maybe they'll come with us. I don't know if there is or not. But, so essentially we are on our own. And we have to make the decision that's best for the school and, for the staff and for the community. Oh, no, I understand that. Yeah, I understand that. But, the reality is we're never going to get the Allenstown or Epsom or whoever has those lower increases. Oh, yeah, that's okay. We'll go up 15% instead of our 7%, so you can come down to 7%. Like the open enrollment.
Because I guess I would say, I don't see how we don't start investigating other plans. And presumably other but also looking at this document that's posted where where it says percent increase, if we could get says, I don't want to get math, but I understand why they put NA But if we could get a sense of what, both for the district, what the percentage increase would be of the different component plans. And also for the employee with that. Because that second number is going to be important because it's not in the abstract. If we were to say you're going to adjust the plan, they may end up paying more money for like prescriptions, for instance, right? But that gets mitigated by whatever they otherwise would have been paying for increased premiums under the premium plan, right? And the net result will be lower cost for the district as well, right? So it's, if you follow what I'm saying. So like, this is, three-step math here, it's not special. If we can actually get some kind of comparable number with these optional plans, that might make the conversation, whether it's an MOU or whether it's going to a different plan, that makes that conversation better. It can't just be, we're going to hand over 30% increase to everybody. Nor can it just be, we're changing your healthcare plan and we'll have some. But there's got to be some real smarts there about what your actual health is.
I mean, we'll have to calculate out, I think we calculated out.
Probably
Yeah,
not right now,
because,
but yeah.
right, because of the, I mean, it's in the CBA of what percentage of employee pays. So it's already determined what percentage they pay, this whole plan together.
Sure.
So we should, like,
Yeah, but the
it's
total dollar,
yeah.
is going to go up.
Right.
So the question is, where you.
I mean, you don't think that, we ever work on that. It's gonna be difficult because we have the. No, it's just a kind of like how much is it going to increase for the average employee, how much is it going to increase for, like, what does that dollar look like for the employee that they're now increasing that amount coming out of their paycheck going into next year as well. And how much is coming, with school funded. And then, when we do get the other rates in, that will be the time where we just make those decisions of like, where do we want to go here? And we'll have to connect with our union reps to see where their heads are at, what they're thinking, and probably put them in for conversation regarding that. Potential MOU, if that's the way everything is going. No one wants to be negotiated down.
The town is going through the same thing, and they're changing plans. But they don't have a bargaining unit. So they're going to change their plans, which, to the detriment of the town. But, it's the same thing, and this is definitely an unsustainable rate. Change. And yet another burden. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of money.
Have we ever, any hour from
I've been 7 years, whatever. Nothing close. Like it's historically been, I think the biggest one I ever remember was either 12 or 15. So we're there.
Sorry, Bill, who's on the negotiation? You guys are looking at next year.
We do.
It
have
is on there.
committees.
Somebody would be like, oh, that's me.
Me and Ken,
It is a team.
you did it.
You're on the negotiations committee.
Did I miss a movie? No, it's the day, okay, fine, we'll do this.
That would have been a point to make after.
You said you've done this before too, by the way.
Well, I negotiate, full negotiations until next year.
Yeah.
Teacher
Yeah.
review, right.
Which I think I'm the only one left that I've got a teacher to take care of.
This is not, I mean, David back on what he's saying, this is not sustainable, and again, my health insurance went up too, I'm paying huge co-pays, my deductible is insane. This, we've got to figure, negotiating, paying a little bit more. I don't, I get it, but we also need, everybody needs to.
Every single one of us, administration, staff, us on the board, the residents of the town are all getting hit with this year. And our tax rate is already pretty stiff, and this is just another ask that's, I think we do have to get,
So I'd like to wait to see what else we get.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, the sky is falling right now tonight because we saw this, but.
But as we get it, I'll compile it and collect it and then do that portioning and breakdown that Ken was talking about. And look at the, the bigger consequences of essentially doing a bit of a plan. But then look at all that data, then we'll put that group together and we'll start that process. But we may have to budget for something in the meantime, because this is going to take longer for us to figure out than before our budget is released.
We've got flexibility in that up until the public hearing,
Correct.
or even after the public hearing. I believe.
Oh, I mean, the budget would be set essentially, but we could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's get really close to our health insurance.
It's 44% of the.
I know, I'm just saying, it's getting really close, it's like a lot. Yeah.
Well, it's the biggest part of it.
Yeah, it is.
Your job is wrong. The next piece, for us,
Yes.
we have, this is part of this, are you okay if I hop on the transportation?
Oh, right.
I think it's very.
Okay, that sounds-
Let's pull up the sheet that we were just sharing. So we did get 2 formal bids in for transportation. I know, we were hoping for 3, but it sounded like we were gonna get
We got
3.
two.
We can tell. We can get to.
So what's happening?
It's very rude.
So one is deal, so STA, did put in a bid. And we also had Butler Bus Services put in a bid as well. So, Dale put in a bid for each separate district, because that's how we put out the RFP, and with the option to do the full, contract. Butler put in a bid for all the districts, or Dearwood separately. So they did it that way. They didn't put in a separate bid for each individual. They didn't want everything, all the transportation. So this transportation commission will go to all the boards in the next 2 weeks. Because each board will have to make a decision, but with the caveat that they can choose if they want to go with Dale or with Butler. All districts are gonna have to agree to go with Butler, or else it's gonna be nothing, because if they'll just take the year alone, if your bill chooses that, or it will be there. I just did Marston's,
They,
correct? So they're not even part of them.
oh, they're not in it.
No,
Oh,
check this
all
one
right.
out. So there's only 4 districts there. We did reach out to some of the vendors, we reached out to First Student, STA, Dale, Butler Bus, Solid Transportation, Pembroke Transportation, Home Base, and Deliver Ride, as well as listed it in the Concord Monitor. There's the 2 formal proposals I can talk about. Butler Bus is a vendor from Woodstock, Vermont, currently serving school districts in New Hampshire and Vermont. They've been in operation for over 50 years. Butler will employ their own staff locally with an operational manager, bus drivers, office staff, dispatchers, maintenance personnel, etc. They will establish a new local location for a transportation facility, so essentially a place to store their buses when they're not in use. So they will obtain that upon winning of the contract if that's what happens. They will keep a floater each day for the central location as a backup for any shortfall. So if there's a bus driver who's not sick, they have a floater who will automatically pick up that route and fill it. Or hop around and fill it inside the river. They do use a lot of technology. They use Beacon Connect, which allows for direct communication with dispatch, schools, and drivers. They use a Beacon Connect family app that allows communication between school and parent and the bus company and all buses will be outfitted with cameras, GPS, and radios. Pretty standard. Route systems used is TransFinder. That's their application that they use for creating their bus routes. Allows for route optimization, field trip requests, so districts can request field trips through the app. We can put in blackout dates. We can do whatever we need to do for that. Allows for driver check-ins, allows for bus driver itineraries, and they expressed some interest in RFP for special education for next year. So we'll be looking at that coming shortly, so they were interested in that as well. And then approach to, let's see. Approach to contractual, so the finances of it all. The first year of their proposal is basically a flat rate to what it is now. So you'll see actually on your sheet that you have provided, there's actually a decrease in the regular transportation line right on the front, page 60 regular transportation, so the decrease of 170,000. And that's assuming we went with Butler, which is a slightly higher bid, I think just around $1,000 in a 3-year contract. So it's very minimal, but we want the more expensive bid over the 3-year term period. But there's a discount year 1 because Butler's first year, they would stay at the funding levels we currently are for year 1. So there would not be an increase for next school year with them. There would be year 2, there's a 4% increase, and then year 3, there's a 5%. Dale, it's you guys, we've done with it for a long time, you know, kind of their situation and how we utilize them. They will continue to employ staff locally, operation manager, bus driver, office staff, inspectors, etc. Has an established local transportation facility, does not keep a floater each day. The central location is a backup. They utilize office staff for coverage. Technologies used, all buses will be outfitted with camera radios. Route system used is Traversa, so it's a different one than Butler uses. STA Dale is not agreeable to the district's assessing of a financial penalty for, so part of our RFP is that we would assess a financial penalty if they fail to provide the required buses that we need, or if they fail to arrive 10 minutes, within 10 minutes of the start of the school day, or to maintain backup bus and driver. So they did not agree to the district's assessing of financial penalties. Their contract, their finances that they're proposing is, employing a 4% increase year one and then 3.5%, the consecutive years. One thing to note is that each bus company provided a fuel surcharge. So, charging of how much it's going to fill per gallon. So, Butler is proposed a $3.75 mileage for fuel. Dale said that their projection was $3.15, but that it went over 80% of the right to charge us an additional fees beyond that. So while they maintain a 3.5% increase steady over the years, we will likely be charged a surcharge every single year for the cost of diesel. Even though they're diesel, it's not $3.15.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense.
So the average cost of fuel is generally between $3.50 and $3.80. So just things to consider. And I'm not looking for you guys to make a decision tonight. I will have you just keep this in here unless you tell me otherwise. If the number she has right now, we would need to make a decision in our next meeting, I guess, would like to do. So I will upload more of the information. We just let these in Friday, so I've been reviewing and compiling. So I'll upload the summary sheet that she gave and any other informational pieces we can include all of those. Questions or comments or concerns?
And this is gonna go to the other school board too.
Yes.
I guess the only question is why do you feel? So even if the school district's no longer will take your.
My guess is the number of buses. Because Deerfield provides high school transportation. And so I don't know that doing some of our other districts would give them the benefit of that. That's what I guess. Where Deerfield has potentially 10 buses in their budget and the good stuff.
Don't put the cart before the horse.
Do you guys want ever to do anything different, or do you want me to keep it in there the way that you got it for next round of presentation?
Good like this.
Any other questions regarding budget that you guys noticed when you were looking for things?
I think with the advent of the school care increase, I would have to ask you to ask it again and go back and look at their budgets as to how we can absorb some of this, just so they're prepared.
Yeah.
It's like the hall pass,
Yeah.
the saxophone, that kind of stuff. I know I'm picking here now, but, more wants than needs. Look at, the wants versus the needs, areas versus non-critical.
We know where our customers are at, we've got that, so. I agree with Jane, the wants versus the needs. So
Where we currently sit, we are looking at, this is our increase. Where we currently sit, 352,000 over.
Yeah.
Well, no, actually, because the warrant articles are kind of hard.
It doesn't take you to the work. So it's an increase of 1.5. Because your warrant articles are in the budget, for last year. So it's like a false positive. So it's, your budget is increasing by proposed. It was under, like under a million. So, right, for the healthcare.
Although on the bright side, that is still, that's.
Yes.
But that's cool.
Well, it's half right now, not including warrant articles. So, but then again, those warrant articles are only exist if we have
Right.
a surplus.
Right.
So. Alright.
The other thing you guys need to consider is there's no increases in this budget to account for non-CBA staff. So you guys have decided what you want to do for increases for, both school facilities, river facilities, water facilities, admin, any of those folks, as well as food service. So there's a sheet I think is actually like it's got pink and tan on the bottom, and if you put it on the back, it is food service. So you were laid out what a 2% increase would look like, 2.5, 3% for each of those category of folks. So I'd be looking for a direction from you guys on where you want her to, how you want her to budget. I would like for you to give me a number to put in tonight, you can finalize it next time, but at least give me a number that you have her put into the budget for the next time.
I think equity would see what it looks like. It just be a,
Put like the biggest impact.
Yes.
So,
8 cents on 100,000, 8 cents on.
yes, right. And getting the increases that are contractually for the year. They are, I'm making it.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm, you know, I'm looking at this, and I'm looking at admin mostly. I can be fiscally responsible. Admin is financially in a better position than, the non-CBA employee. So I push for a lower increase in the admin than I would for the other two categories.
No, I understand.
It'd be nice to give everybody 3%, but if we can save a couple of pennies on the tax rate, then it's a drop in the bucket, but it's something that hopefully people understand. I'm like admin, looking right now maybe at a 2%, and looking at the other staff, I would have to say 30. It's well than $1,000.
so we have her put that in the next sentence, so we can see what's that.
Sounds good. Roughly going to be limited.
Yes. I agree.
Facilities and kitchen, we'll do research, maybe 3%, and
Yeah, those. Because the health insurance, so we have to, we're
So timeline, just timeline reminders for the budget. We need to have our budget binder together and delivery to the NBC board on December. So, we'll come with some adjustments for next time.
Yeah.
But then we're pretty tight turnaround for the next meeting will be December 16th.
We don't have another meeting.
We have 12/2
and
12/16. So just giving you reminders on the timeline.
we'll have administration here too.
Yes.
So, we'll start letting everyone
If they have areas,
If they are good with me.
yeah, areas to reduce. I'd say at least half of that puts us basically down in the 15% range. Plus that.
So that would be probably 2 staff members plus. The only way to decrease your budget by 100,000 staff.
I learned first and foremost is picking out those areas that really don't need to be funded. Nice to fund, but
Okay. Would you be okay if I had to create charts?
yeah. I would expect everything.
Play with those.
And
Like the hall pass, but in line.
Yes.
Yeah, like the nurse needs to go from the arts to the class.
Well,
So,
that's
too much money. We're not doing overhead.
no, I would definitely suggest, the one thing though, if they are looking right now, I don't know if they're looking already to replace the screens, that we don't want to talk. I don't know if that's a possibility or not, but something that's upgradable for more than 5 years. That's bad.
Yep.
Replacement.
Go down to the schools, let's go to slightly back to the village adjustments, like I don't want
Yeah.
to lose programming in rural public education. The school districts against each other, right? Like, you need to make sure we keep that up.
That is a very valid concern that I have, is that I really would struggle to support hiring educators at this point. Just because, and you guys can just obviously do what you want to do, but in the world of us planning for open enrollment potentially, we're not going to track money.
Right. And again, it's just, it would be nice
Yeah.
to be able to take up half of that,
Yes.
but,
Yep.
Again, looking, like you said, to the trust funds to support, and so forth. The other thing, speaking of trust funds and on the school care issue, we're going to talk about that for the maintenance and stuff like that.
So there's a sheet next to your board, guys, that talks about, the.
Move on yet. I'm just-
Yeah.
I don't wanna move on yet.
Well, it's all related to the
Yeah.
budget, so, I did include a sheet that we got from school care, we talked about payment plan options. Not that that reduces any of the obligation to pay the money, but it gives us options. And this is one to give us another option 1,
Yeah.
where we pay a third of the assessment by the subdivision. And to avoid the interest fees.
Well, we could do a little bit more. Okay. I don't know how much work there could do the third. And encumber the rest of that money. Is there a way we can get interest off of the other? Yeah. I mean, as minimal as it might be, again, it's gonna be better than nothing.
I don't think we can, right?
I don't
Because
know.
we pulled that one out and we didn't know how to retain it, but there's one and we don't agree that there's not. So I think we have to pay that on school fair because we're not allowed to do that.
No, as long as we. Yeah, well, it's all encumbered, but we only have it.
So we can.
I don't want to be
Exactly. I agree.
We did encumber it for our payment because it was, we only did this question to go back. And claim the rest of anything that we had left for fund balance from last year, because this was last year's expense. So we did get the opportunity to gather that 400,000 that was left. We did hold off on sending the check until December and your guys' request. But I'm assuming it's already collecting.
Wherever it sits.
Right, okay.
Right,
Okay.
So it would mitigate and then some.
but if we don't pay, if we pay 1/3, we don't.
You know,
And
Yeah.
again, it'll be a little more in return.
Yeah.
But
I would just better.
the other question actually that I wrote in the budget was the legality of us possibly having into, pay, let's, for example, pay for some of our special ed services that we may not necessarily have to because they're in the budget and move money around to kind of have a surplus that we need to pay the remaining.
We have had some unanticipated costs, and I can talk to that more in public. But we do have some unanticipated costs that we're not budgeted for, so we could utilize the trust for those unanticipated costs that are associated with the district placements. So that is an option. We need to go there.
And that is it, and that's what I said,
Yeah.
if we need to go there, there's a
Yeah.
possibility that we can move money around in the lines to take something out of the trust fund, there being the trust funds.
I reached out to Julie Robinson.
Yeah, last Wednesday, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, but again, and, answer the question. Ability. But yeah, the legality part is big for him.
I think there were conclusions jumped to, and we really was trying to explore options.
Yeah.
So I think it was just a miscommunication, and misunderstanding. Miscommunication on my part, misunderstanding. But we should have talked about that. We talked about last week, we marked it. So, we talked.
And I understand everyone has to be fair. My head, I guess.
So I'll talk with Amber and, get her kind of official opinion on and stance on how we're trying to pay that for the unbalanced funds. Can I just say one more thing? Going back and looking how I know.
But I also think that it's horribly sad that as of January 1st too, that they were like a dear advantage for like a retiree, you know, 7%. Or at least, I'm really glad that we're up to date, but I'm really bothered by that number.
I don't know if we're gonna see much better numbers from the county plan, and that's based on,
I'm sure.
Yeah.
But I just feel like, I was like a simple mammy, I just feel like. We're just gonna take away, well, here's a special assessment, you owe this. Your retirees who may be struggling already are gonna pay this, and I know you guys estimated right, but you should have tripled it. That's just a lot.
And I'm not going to be reference to management horse.
I know. And I guess I would encourage you to start doing others,
I will say that, so we met with several representatives, on the senator, about a week ago, and they have heard a lot of their concerns about it. So they, everyone's speaking to that, they have heard it, and that was kind of a discussion, which is why, are bringing legislation forward to help address some of their risk pool factors. It's not that it's not retroactive, it's not going to be passed. But they are working on trying to fix things moving forward for those programs that are at risk pool.
Okay. I was in Pembroke, at Ryan's and New Hampshire Sheriff's Department. Does not, this is not in the curve. Secretary of State's.
Right.
Are we moving on to the PA programs?
Okay.
So, that survey that we had sent out a couple weeks ago, we got 187 responses as of this morning, so almost 200. So that was great. It gave me good perspective. And it gave me data that I wasn't anticipating, so I think that's a good thing. I will say that the community definitely, well, all the communities, because it's like all the 70 school towns, so 5 towns, really highlighted some key areas that are their top priority for their kids. So the graph below really isn't like a measurement, but it just gives you a pictorial representation of the numbers that are so it's easier to see where things rank in picture form versus just straight numbers. So blue is like the top industry that community members feel represent their town. And then the red is the courses that families want to have available to their kids or their kids have said that they have wanted. So I basically took the top 8 courses that families identify that they want for their kids and, you know, categorize those based on their input. So the top one is actually the third one, but the starter set, families really felt strongly that they want guards that offer through the school. So I think that would be a really great program for us to offer. However, I don't think that's something that we're put to do for next year. There's a lot of legwork that I need to do to get that off the ground, and I'm happy to do so, but that's when you guys want to head. But my guess would be that would be a 2-year course. There would be a lot of work with the state, the NDRD, to figure out how we can do that.
So this would be like a budgeted line item in our budget. Unlike it used to be where it was it done?
Private.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So essentially, it would be that things will set as a class. So it would be an educator that we hire that would teach kids, you know, the driver's ed material, the curriculum, but then also take them out right for the house. So it would have to be, because they would have to become DMV certified to do driver's ed. That's why it's a little more complicated than just adding it as a course. And the whole point of it would be that it would be built into the budget versus families paying $1,000 a pop.
It is.
And close to $1,000, yes, yes, it's a huge expense for our families.
Well, 10 years ago, man. Like $450.
I think the cheapest ones are around $700.
Because he was movies.
See?
And not, all right.
On an overhead projector at the same time.
So, I think that would be a huge benefit to our families if we could get that.
Yeah.
I just know the legwork to it is going to be a couple of years out. But I think it's something we should pursue. So I met with Mr. Hamilton, to kind of review some of these things and kind of triage what we felt like would be low-hanging fruit, like easy paths for us. Whether, like, we may be even able to make this work with our current staffing for some of these, and readjusting some of our curriculum, and priorities, and, working with teachers to get additional certs that they might need to teach in elective. So we felt that priorities, we could definitely figure something out for first aid CPR, that would be, oh, right, it would be, it's easy enough, we can utilize the local, safety folks for help on getting our people certified that we need to. And we feel like that would be a relatively easy lift, quote unquote. We also felt like electricity and plumbing would be some potential options for year one. We were thinking that driver's ed would be a year two idea. And then the computer tech and digital creation would also be year two, maybe. And then year 4, 5, we're thinking the small business and everything. So trying to stage these things, and if you guys were good in putting this direction, I think year 1, we probably could manage without adding new staff. But year 2 and 3, we would definitely be looking for at least one full FTE being added, if not 2. And then year 3, 4, we'd be looking at probably an additional 2 FTEs being added. But all of these courses would help draw in interested kids if we're, talking open enrollment. This would be a goal for our kids, potential kids. What do we mean by small business? Like,
The background
courses was only small business and multiple classes. So the blue, remember, was just talking to season time.
Oh,
So small business was just kind of help what people felt were the top industry at the time. So instead of listing 100 different businesses, just like any kind of on the top of small business, that is not being really select. Potentially, maybe even some of these over time would be like a whole program. But starting off with elective courses, yeah. And again, this is raw data like from community members. So I think some of the other higher choices for families were equipment operations, so things like cat tractors, things like that, childcare, education, forest and land management, animal husbandry, large and small, and then homesteading, and then landscape. And then there was a couple of more ops. A variety of different things. So are you, you guys okay with us moving in strategy? Are you okay with that kind of 5-year plan-ish moving forward, or what would you guys like to see?
If there's something we can move into without, then let's see what that looks like. That's a hard. But having, a plan that we can put in front of people and say, that this is you know, including compensation. Go for it.
I think we can do any as a company without too much, staff, like first aid and CPR. I think it's very easy to do between the nurses. They should have nursing program, we have nurses created, we have master's program, like, I guarantee somebody who has their master's program, like, I'm gonna go do that. Like, I can see how that would be easily done that money.
We only have to, I said this, that, you know, we hold back some of the AP offering. And I see those before.
Yeah.
As much as I think we serve the population, that was a loss for a secondary population. That was significant. And, you know, we don't want to block past that. So,
A lot more under there, right? The budget? Yeah.
There was materials, there was some of those. There was a lot.
yeah, it requires
Yes.
rethinking.
I will try to finish synthesizing this information and then get it back out to the community, like sharing the results. So that they can see what everyone else decided as well. So we'll all be doing that.
Also, thank
That's
you.
great responses too.
Yeah, so look, it's probably 200 people. All right. Moving on, are we doing any policies, number 7 week policies? We do have policies.
Okay.
And we can. Okay with this confusion with the budget. You added after transfer.
Oh, I put this
Yeah.
together without finding this,
Sorry. Thank you.
So I was going to propose moving to adopt some of the policies and moving some of them for some additional information that are required. Of the policies that we could move to adopt, I would recommend, DFGA for the curriculum, DN for the sale, and do I have one other? JLIA, the supervision of students as they are,
so I should have feedback from our principals. You guys have to make this example. And I actually would request that we get the report read, so I could actually like Richard Coughlin. He will have some. So I thought, I should really be the FDA and let's do it at the flat.
Quick
So-
question on that. Where did we leave our conversation with respect to teachers who grow? That, I know that was an outstanding question.
Right now, there is nothing in that part,
Right.
because there are no boundaries for folks to function in, because we don't have a problem.
Right, but I don't recall that, I feel like we still had a question with respect to. Like, that makes sense, what is present, right? Like, you know, right, what are we talking about other than a bill?
So, maybe you can help me with any of it, there's a popular one that teachers use where they do what custodians. Is the name of it?
No.
Yes. You know, I think we do have some folks that utilize that, but I don't think it's a huge number. But this policy would be helpful so that we could set boundaries, like if they are asking for things that are over a certain dollar limit, But that needs to come to the board for approval before something like that is done. I might have missed something, but when I read through that one, I was, thought we were touching on all the things that we need to be. I mean, obviously, this.
And I think it would be on the board to talk to that. I wouldn't.
I thought so too.
Design that, it's a simple, for the. No, I mean, I can create something. And we would have to agree on that. Right.
Is it school property? So under section C, C1G, statement of recognition of the pastor that.
And it's under number 5 as well, we're seeking application of donations. It says regardless of their form, community traveling on behalf of the district or school property.
So in, as long as we're, with everyone understand, then they go on to ask. So. Right now, they don't.
I guess what I'm talking, are we talking cash? Or are we talking donation of items to all donations regardless of the form? Yes.
I think that.
It's just incredible.
Are you thinking about general supplies donated to the classroom? Because that would not be addressed by race law.
No, this is the only thing we can refer to previous issues when, things went down. Right, but that's what I'm saying is, can this policy be manipulated? I know it's not technically crowdfunding, but if someone take this and say, well, that was donated to you to use in your classroom and then goes on.
And again, email goes out, and the person is donating it to that teacher, but an email goes out and says, hey, who can find this? I mean, technically, that's kind of crowdfunding.
Well, to this point, though, this was my policy defines crowdfunding. This is what it says. The practice of using online sites, e.g. Pembroke or classful.com, etc., to solicit the donation for the monetary school district, including any class effort. It specifically targets, so it defines crowdfunding as using online sites. Maybe that's good, maybe that's not, but it's.
No.
I don't think there's any way to avoid a gray area until this is clear.
You have to consider adopting a different policy around donation.
Right.
Just in addresses all other kinds of organizations. If we can decide or the board may decide that, you know, if somebody does something to a teacher, that isn't necessarily school. But that would remain the
Right.
teacher's property, is donated to, you know, that could be a choice.
Yes, right.
Decision. If we were to go on, okay, somebody that is pivotal to the classroom, that would be.
Crowdfunding. But by this, an email campaign is not covered by this policy.
Right, that's all I'm thinking. What are we doing?
I was gonna say, I don't know how second. Any other discussion? This is on the FGA discussion. All right, all in favor of approving the FGA, say aye. Aye. Motion is.
Yeah.
And it would be D if we're gonna move to a fourth reading.
Just so I can talk to them.
Believe that's simple.
Yeah.
Equipment and supplies. But I want to look into that first.
So I have a suggestion, for an edit to JLCK for physical and emotional well-being. So an edit to the New Hampshire School Board Association draft. My specific recommendation, well, I have two questions, because one of the policy addresses physical health support, emotional, mental health support, and prevention and intervention. In section 2, under the emotional and mental health support, the second bullet that the school board states includes providing regular training for staff on mental health awareness and trauma-informed practice. And I just hesitate on that without providing more clarification. Are we talking about all staff within the school system, or are we talking specifically about providing training to staff who are providing mental health services?
So this, from my perspective, this is referring to all staff, because all staff, there is training that we go through around conflict. It is a leader. Not necessarily every year, but on a semi-regular basis. Something that's just new every year.
So do we, I guess my concern is, are we comfortable saying providing regular training specifically to these topics that we really provide? Or what we would tend to do, right?
Yes, and I would push that. I would look at it more as one of the work that the rest of the is the best practice. And even if you didn't feel like you said be manageable, it's the right thing to do, because we have kids that come in and go about trauma, and our staff has to help.
Absolutely, I agree with the idea. I just want to make sure that we as a district are providing that.
Yes, and the state has a lot of resources for us to utilize, like a lot of times we offer free training. In this area, so the Department of Ed has a lot of resources available to districts, but that kind of stuff.
I want to make sure we have access to that in order to make such a commitment.
Yep.
And then, so the only edit then I would recommend then is under section 3 for prevention and intervention. The third bullet is explore ways to collaborate with families and community organizations to extend support beyond school. While I feel like we already do that at the school, I feel like this is very vague to put in a policy with an expectation on the school district to put this into policy. So I would recommend striking that bullet in general. The rest of it kind of addresses that we obviously support. So section 3 is prevention and intervention. There's three bullets: establishing procedures for identifying and supporting students in crisis, promoting anti-bullying initiatives and conflict resolution. And the third is just very broad. It just says explore ways to collaborate with families and community organizations to extend support beyond school, which it's already embedded in our, I don't know, we need to write it into this policy with and clarification of what we're doing.
I would keep it though. I would tend to keep it. The New Hampshire School Board Association has it in there, and prevention and intervention, it's kind of like we may be already doing it. They would have striked it if it didn't matter, but There is already that, especially when it's special with the you know what I'm saying?
It would require us, if by leaving it in, it would require us. to follow the law. And one day, if we don't have it as a policy, one day it's going to push it aside. But having the policy.
Like if we were all going tomorrow, yeah.
I wonder if the road circle, like really four ways is pushing. If we strike explore ways to it, we can just collaborate with families.
I'll do that.
Yep.
Yes, I would feel better with that, Eddie. Thank you. It's just that it's just sounds, yeah, yeah, it's not,
I wouldn't want to strike the whole thing, but I would be okay. with
okay,
it.
I would,
Yeah, we're talking,
okay, with that.
yeah. Yeah, we're talking. Right, and
That just-
it's like.
Exploring.
What does that mean?
Exploring.
Actively, so I read it.
So I would then move to approve and adopt that policy JLIA as edited for section 3.
That's JLCK.
It's one JLCK.
Adopt JLIA, and we
We
never,
did,
we
yep.
didn't actually go back to that.
Yep, I just get keep getting confused
That's
because
okay.
they're right next to each other.
JL.
Yeah.
So we're going to adopt with edits, JLC.
Any discussion? All those in favor of adopting JLCK with the edits, say aye. Say nays.
Did we vote to adopt JLIA?
No, we don't.
So I move to adopt JLIA supervision of students as recommended by the school organization.
So you have some plans for that one.
There it is.
There was a request to add in some language in here that mirrors the language that's in the form. So after the second paragraph and before the third, adding in the language that exists, it is essential that students be supervised at all times within the building. Educators are responsible for students that are in their classrooms unattended. Faculty and staff must not leave students unattended in their classrooms at any time before school, during school, hours, or after school. So adding that language to clarify that please the implication, no kid is left unattended in their classroom. It's adding this into mirror language of there. Not particularly, I just thought it was where I heard it now. Do you feel that she smiles? Okay.
I mean, it might better fit above the principal or the principal is responsible for promoting and providing. And then, you know, you state that and then you follow the process of doing that. I don't think it does, you know, I mean, it doesn't make any difference really, it's just.
So we would need a motion.
Say,
I have one more minute.
go ahead.
So the policy that currently exists with JLIA was the release of students. You guys had it listed as release of students. Basically it said during school hours or engaging in school conduct activities, students will be released only into the custody of parents and or operating person. So I would recommend that we add that one sentence into this policy as well, because that's still would be accurate that we're only releasing kids to authorized people. You know, authorized people could be applied at the high school level, too, if they have their permission. So, for, yeah, so
In a place where they're open.
We do. We already know.
if they're in the building. Yeah, I mean, that would be a big, yes.
You've been here for a little while. Yeah. Okay, yeah. You're doing a great job, right? I don't know.
That must be something new, because that's all my years of picking kids up. I've never.
But again, to your earlier point, it's not for the policy, but it's for not. Or that we can't do. Right? Yeah, it makes perfect sense for the other schools. Like, we've got 18-year-olds that drive themselves away.
Yeah, it does say during school hours, or while engaged in content activities like, clubs, field trips, things like that. They're not just gonna dismiss a kid to unapproved person during the school day.
You're talking about after, okay.
Yeah, and I'll tell you after school. After school, they're dismissed. That's
Who cares about
Reading
the
about rights, right.
Really?
it's during school hours or while engaged in school sponsored activity. So it's not after the dismissal of those things, and the kids that are writing themselves that they are the unauthorized person.
Here. I don't have a problem.
So there's two, so those are adding those two current policies have to do into this policy. Correct. So we would need to amend. We need to vote on an amendment. Okay, then.
Well, we didn't,
No, because we have a motion moved.
on this one, we didn't move on. We did.
Oh,
Oh,
you're right.
yep.
Okay.
You could withdraw that motion and make a new motion.
Yep, I will withdraw my motion to adopt JLIA through the student. And instead, move to adopt with edit JLIA through the student.
I'll second that. Any other questions, concerns? All those in favor of approving JLIA supervision of students as amended or as edited, say aye.
Aye.
Mentions? Nay?
I only think more to you now.
Sorry, you got more?
As the other two policies, I refer to. Under, if you, yeah, I was gonna ask, do you have anything to discuss about that?
No, actually, not yet. So I agree.
Let's hold those. So we're gonna hold JLBF wellness and JIC student.
Okay. And then the other one is just on second reading with JFABE. But I would encourage us to, change just a little bit of the wording in there. I find that, I'm just trying to get this little connection. Oh, okay, so under, it's in other places here, but, under the New Hampshire School Board Association, recommended, under A, under number 2, living in motels, hotels, trailer parks, or campgrounds due to lack of alternative adequate accommodations. So let's see, so, this, so you want to say trailer parks? Yes. All right, if you want to change the mobile home.
Well, it's just,
Modular.
I don't know.
it just doesn't make sense the way it's.
It sounds good.
Yes, thank you. That's what I guess that's what I'm trying to say, is it just doesn't sound like it belongs. Like the living in cars and all that, but yes, if you have all the and like hotel, or campground, I think of that as, you know, that is the category. Trailer park.
Yeah, it's not they live in the trailer park qualified fund, it's that they live in the trailer park due to lack of alternative adequate accommodations. So we could be displaced there, not because we were there. Because a lot of people are there because it's hot. But
Yeah, I yeah.
That is
Yes.
interesting.
Because I feel like that's, why wouldn't that be considered as the law?
It can be, but that's the difficulty in saying that.
And I don't want to die.
So, well, you can't.
Okay, well, so we can.
We'll see. Like this paragraph. All the children of the individual provided. So we added that in the example. You're quite not consistent with the way the park mobile. Well,
And we can move that one
Wherever. I have a quick question on that one. So, like it says that they revised in October 2025.
Yes.
Just, it was already confidential. It was protected property. Information, what is confidential information? I'm looking on the NHSBA one and it says revision notes, October 2025. The only revised was to include specific language relating to provisions, housing circumstances, and living situation of the student is protected. Under the act, is confidential information and not be considered directory information under directory information.
So what it is. What it is still really small.
Oh. So that's all they were saying. So I just find it interesting.
or any other component.
Right, probably is we didn't have this policy in place, and it's required by law to have this policy in place.
Okay, that's what
Especially
she
for
gets.
grants and.
I didn't realize that. I was like, oh, the only thing they're changing is this wording. So
We're not changing anything because we're adding it.
Okay.
All right, we're adding this policy.
That makes
Because we were missing this policy and we were really required to have it because we received grants that entitle us to utilize some of those songs for.
Okay.
So, you go with the third reading.
Yeah. I missed that. No. I didn't have that one. Actually, okay, sure. All right, is that it for policies? Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Moving on, number 8, we have public comments. We have no members of the public, so we're going to skip public comments. Ready to go. All right. Number 9, we have, the board does have, we need to go into public session. Just a reminder that the next Pembroke School Board meeting is Tuesday, December 2nd at 6:30 p.m. here in the Pembroke Academy Library. We're going to know the public under NHRSA 91. Appointment J, Rule 3, Rule 2, smaller A and J. Is, huh? I don't, because it's a we should, I was told we should. I know. Yes, I know. A is the dismissal, promotion, or compensation of any public employee or the disciplining of such employee or the investigation of any charges against him or her. And J, consideration of confidential, commercial, or financial information. Both of which are non-public. I will vote at 9:18. Sharon?
Yes.
James?
Yes.
Ken?
Yes.
And Terry? Yes. Yes.